Welcome to the KIX EAP Podcast, your monthly podcast with important leaders in education from Eastern Europe, Middle East and North Africa, Central Asia, and the Asia Pacific. I'm your host, Ryan Allen, assistant professor at Chapman University here in Southern California, and my own background is in international and comparative education. Let's start the show. Today we have Dr. Elena Kardanova from the National Research University Higher School of Economics in Moscow, Russia. We go over her career and her interest in mathematics and later in psychometrics. Then we talk more about her university and research center and some of the challenges of balancing between Russian and English publishing. All right, let's go to the interview. Dr. Kardanova, thank you for joining us today. If we could, maybe let's open up with your educational background. You have a PhD and an MA from St. Petersburg State University in mathematics, or your background's in mathematics. I know, mathematics sometimes scares a lot of people, and it's something that's, I don't like numbers. And it almost like traumatizes, I think, students or kids. And then if they're traumatized, then they just don't want to get into it. So what was your sort of relationship, or how did you get into mathematics?
Yes. Thank you for asking, Ryan. But first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to participate in this postcard. It's a new experience for me. It's very interesting to participate in. I hope it will be successful. And thank you that I am the first person from Russian Federation. It's interesting and it's new for me. So asking your question, really my background is in mathematics. And I graduated from St. Petersburg State University many years ago. And I had my PhD also in mathematics, more exactly in differential equations. So qualitative theory of differential equations. And many years after that, I taught higher mathematics at university in Veliki Novgorod. It's a very famous city in Russia. And I taught mathematics for students with double E major. And also I taught differential theory of differential equations for students with major applied mathematics. And only in the end of 90s, I turned my career to psychometrics. It was a very interesting way because it was unexpected for me. And it just happened by chance because it is an interesting story because tests were prohibited in Russia to use from 1966. Before that, psychometrics, we had several scientific groups, several labs who developed tests, and there are two directions. One of them was psychotechnics, and they developed tests for professional maybe selection. And another direction was called pedology, and they developed massive tests for everything, to measure everything, including psychological constructs, as well as achievement tests, attitudes, and so on. And there was a very famous and sad government decree in 1936, that and all tests were prohibited for more than 50 years. And only in the beginning of 90s, we began to develop tests. We began to use them in psychology first, and educational tests a little bit later too. And I just in the end of 90s, I read several papers in English. For example, Ron Hamilton book, Fundamentals of Item Response Theory. It was just space for me. It was so interesting, and my background in mathematics, that it helped me a lot, because modern test theory is based on mathematical modeling. So of course it was very interesting for me. It was new. And I tried to find opportunities to go to United States and to study psychometrics. And I had 2 scholarships, one of them in 1998. It was a program Business for Russia. And it was my first experience to work in scholastic testing service under supervision of Dr. John Kaufman. It was my first experience. And I studied classical test theory at that time. I knew so many new conceptions and words like reliability, validity, and item characteristics. It was exciting. And when I came in 1998, I could not stop. So after that, I decided to devote my life to psychometrics, and I went to UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago, in 2002-2003 for a loan scholarship with Fulbright program. And I studied psychometrics. I conducted my own research. And after that, I began this direction at HSE. I was invited to work at Federal Testing Center and at University High School of Economics, where I am working now too. So it's just my way in psychometrics. And answering your question, of course, mathematics is not easy subject, but I liked it all my time and all my life. And fortunately, I was lucky that I had this background. It was much easier to study psychometrics.
See. Okay. Yeah, I'm curious because I think a lot of people coming from this subject in recent years, and maybe students or people who they sort of had their education in the past decade or so, they might not realize big data and computer, programs like SPSS or STAT or R, whatever it might be. These things weren't widely available, or they were in sort of just very limited ways. So I'm wondering what sort of the changes, or what were maybe that you've seen over just from the sort of the 80s, 90s, and then up until today. Like what was that sort of experience like?
Yes, of course, there are great changes. And now psychometrics is different. Now that we have computational psychometrics that Alina von de Veer and her colleagues developed in the United States. So it's a new direction of psychometrics. And of course, you're right. It is not possible to work in psychometrics if you don't like statistics, mathematics, if you cannot use software like specialized, for example, like WinSteps or SPSS that you mentioned, or if you don't use R, that it's very popular now. And of course, you need some things, but there are different degrees of use of this software. For example, you can just use them, and you can understand how to interpret outputs of the software. And for example, as for me, I am in such position now that I usually don't conduct analysis by hand, but my students, my colleagues, we can conduct some kind of analysis together, and I can understand outputs and I can interpret them. And so really, of course, especially if we speak about modern technologies, about big data about digital traces, about analysis of all this information that it's very new. It's new, but very popular now. And it's very important to add this information to just test results and to take it into account. Mm-hmm. So of course, you're right.
Right. I think I use a metaphor I teach a quantitative research class and survey methods. And sometimes I use the metaphor of learning to drive. A lot of people can learn how to drive, and that's maybe using the software. But a lot of people don't learn how to like work on the car and fix the car. And that's understanding the equations and sort of the math and maybe doing those things by hand. Yes. So that's probably the difference between some of the
it's about me also. Because I can drive, but I don't understand anything in the car. So it's about me.
Oh, I see. I'm sure you're selling yourself short there, but I appreciate that. If we can, let's talk a little bit about your National Research University Higher School of Economics. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of students are you training? What are they going to do? And sort of what is the focus of some of the research coming out of your institute there?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I will begin from a short maybe description of my university, because it's untypical university. It's very young, but it's top university of Russia. His history began from 1992. So it's very young university. And now it is one of the top universities. And it's included in many international rankings, including QS, for example. And in education subject rating, we are at first 100 universities of the world now. Can you imagine, for the last year? And so my university is very famous, very. And his history is so untypical, because from 60 students in 1992 to 50,000 students this year. We have 4 campuses in 4 Russian cities. We have all kinds of educational institutes, from secondary school to PhD, post-secondary education. And it's a huge university with a lot of institutes inside. And I represent Institute of Education. And it is younger than HSE. It was founded about maybe 2010.
I see.
And now it's not very big. We have about 250 employees. And my center that I am director of is called Center for Psychometrics and Educational Measurement. And it was founded in 2013 from 4 persons. And now it has about 40. It's one of the biggest centers at the Institute of Education. And we have our master program. It is Science of Learning and Assessment.
I see.
It's the only master program in Russian Federation and previous Soviet Union that devoted to test development and psychometrics.
Oh, wow.
And also we have PhD program, educational measurement and evaluation. And so we have PhD students. And also we have our own summer school. It's international annual summer school, applied psychometrics in psychology and education. Unfortunately, it was canceled during last year, and this year we decided not to conduct it online, but we hope to conduct it next year because it is international, and we have participants from usually from 12, 13 countries, including United States.
That's great.
So it's famous.
Yeah.
Summer school.
That's fantastic. I looked up your center when, but I was doing some research for the interview. I always look up not just the website, but I go and look what I can see on sort of Google Maps, just to kind of get a sense like the physical space that my guests are inhabiting. And I was so jealous when I saw sort of the walkway and the little cafe, and it just looked like such a wonderful location to just to live, a livable human scale location. So I imagine conducting research and learning in that space, it's a fantastic place for learning. I can say that just from
yes, agree. And as if we speak about our students, they have different background. Many of them are psychologists, and they are interested in survey construction, in measuring maybe psychological constructs. And some of them are with technical background and math also, math too. And they're interested maybe in methods of machine learning and maybe use of digital data, how to use time response, for example. And so we have different students with different backgrounds, and it's a challenge to work with them to organize their joint work, because they're very different, but it's very interesting.
Sure.
And we don't have many. We have about 20 each year. And this year we enrolled 30.
Okay. That's great. Well, hopefully things with COVID will ease up in the next year, however that works, and you can sort of normalize some of those summer trainings and things like that. And
yeah, but really we hope to begin our work offline with students this year, but some of them decided to stay at home and study online. So we have like hybrid format.
I see. Yeah. That's
this year.
A lot of people are jumping into that. I did a little bit of that myself. So as an educator, I don't know how you feel, but it's much harder. It's like you're teaching two classes.
Yes, sure. It's very hard to teach hybrid. Yes.
How about if we jump a little bit into your research? We already talked about, you focus on sort of psychometrics and large scale data sets. Maybe we can kind of jump into a few of your pieces. And I just want to say congratulations on your Nature Human Behavior piece. That's a huge journal. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I thought it was kind of interesting. You were just talking about sort of skill development in STEM education, but you're comparing across not just in one country, but you're doing true international comparisons. Can you talk a little bit about that piece?
Yes, it was very, very big study and survey, and we conducted this research for, I think, 4 or 5 years, from maybe, because it was a longitude study, and we sampled students in different countries, Russia, China, and India. And we used, my center was responsible for psychometrics modeling for this project. The project was called SUPA Test Project. So it was conducted by different countries by leadership of Prashant Layalka from Stanford University.
Okay.
And we tried to compare achievement skills and gains of students engineering majors like IT and double E majors. And so students were surveyed when they just started their study at the university first year, and after that third year, and the second cohort was from the third year to fourth year. So it's undergraduate students in different countries, big samples.
Right.
And we tested them with professional competencies tests, and also higher order skills tests like critical thinking or creativity or relational reasoning tests. So there were different instruments. Some of them were developed by international team, including us, and some of them were provided by our partners, for example, educational testing service.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was a great, great study. And we tried to compare, especially games, because students, of course, they began their study with different level of critical thinking, for example. But what happens while they're students of university, if the level of their critical thinking increased or no, or decreased, or is the same. So it was, results were very interesting. You can read in this paper. It was, of course, unexpected for us, because in Russia, it was the first attempt to assess critical thinking for our Russian students. It was first attempt. We don't have instruments for this now. My center is developing tests of critical thinking right now, but it is not ready yet. And we don't have reliable and valid instruments for measuring critical thinking in Russia. So it was the first attempt, and results, of course, were very interesting.
Right. We won't spoil them, I guess, for the listeners. They'll have to go and check it out themselves. Maybe we can provide a link, certainly.
Yes, sure, it's open.
No, I think it's interesting that you talk about there's no reliable instrument in Russian. One of the things that I have been trying to get some of my students, international students who can both read and speak their local language and English, is to really take some of the instruments and surveys that are widely available and widely used in the US and translate them over, localize them, make them culturally responsive. And that's like a great, valuable resource for the scientific community, I think.
Yes, you're right, of course. But there are many reasons that sometimes it's better to have own instruments. For example, there are cultural differences, there are languages difficulties, and we have great experience if test translation and adaptation into Russian language from English or from German, because we have many different international projects, and we use different instruments for different purposes. But for if we would like to use in Russia, it's better, especially, I mean, of course, not level of a teacher, I mean level of maybe national or maybe state level, that implies high quality of instrument.
Right.
And that it's proved that it's qualitative, reliable, and valid. And of course, specialists must develop our own instruments that are based on our standards, that are based on our educational programs, that take into account special features of our maybe educational system. So each country, of course, we can use for certain purposes, we can use international instruments and translate them, especially for international studies.
Right.
But for our own use, we, of course, we need to develop our own. Moreover, I would like to say that there are many constructs that are interested for researchers and maybe policymakers right now, that there are no instruments in the world at all. For example, critical thinking. There is a new construct, critical online reasoning. Is the ability of a person, of a student, to analyze information in internet, to select it, to use it correctly, to solve a problem using information from internet, to critically analyze it. It's a new construct. And now we don't have instrument to assess this construct, and there are attempts to do it. And I can mention a group of Olga Zlatkin-Draychanskaya in Germany, Mainz, University of Mainz. They are working on developing instrument for this construct.
Right.
And we are working together with them on the same constructs too for Russia, because students in this test, students use real internet to solve the problem.
I see.
So it's very difficult to estimate their what words they use to find the information, what sites they used, how did they think trying to solve the problem, and how to analyze essay that they provide as a response to the problem. So it's a huge problem. It's very interesting. And my center works only with innovative instruments. So new constructs, and there are complex latent constructs, not just mathematics, but critical thinking or digital literacy and creativity or something like that. And we use new type of items, of course, not only multiple choice items, but scenario-based items, game-based assessment, and so on. And we require new technologies for this. So it's new world, and all countries work. Of course, we have international partners for all our projects.
It sounds cutting edge. The future, I think, of what other centers might be looking for and looking to your center.
I hope.
That's great. I'm actually, I want to key in on something that you mentioned, and I think is tough for a lot of scholars and countries around the world. They're not English-based countries, but we're in this sort of international system. You know, you mentioned QS and sort of the rankings and things like that, and even sort of some of the top journals. You know, I talked about Nature earlier. Mostly these are English. These are English language focused. So, you know, can you maybe talk a little bit about the balance, or what are the challenges of making sure that you also are honoring and focusing on your Russian language and sort of publishing in Russian as opposed to only the international?
It's a good question. Of course, we would prefer to publish all our articles, all our papers, all our research results in the Russian language. And Americans are very lucky that they can publish everything in their native language. And
right. We don't realize it, but we are.
Yes, and all conferences are in English, and we are talking in English with you. So right. Of course I understand that you are lucky, and it's a change for us. All my young colleagues, they can speak very good English, because really all of them understand that English is the international language, and all of them can do it. My generation, of course, has some difficulties, and but of course we have Russian journals.
Sure.
And for example, we have journals that is Scopus Quartile 1. It's educational studies. It is a journal in Russian language. but it's translated in English.
I see. Okay.
And so you can find at HSE website the English version of this journal. And we try to publish our papers there too. But if we have, for example, international study with international partners, of course, this international team would like to publish the results in international journal and to provide information for all researchers in the world. Not because nobody can read Russian journal if he doesn't know language.
Right.
So the balance is now, I think, maybe 60 international journals and 40% to Russian journals. We understand that we need to write in Russian because it's very important. It's our mission to popularize ideas of good measurement, of new psychometrics, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. You also mentioned policymakers earlier, so I'm curious, how receptive have policymakers been to some of the maybe suggestions and some of the findings that you have in your research?
This question is not only for my center. It relates to the Institute of Education in total, because Institute is big and we have several centers and we have different scientific directions of research. And Institute provides information for policymakers in different topics, including, for example, digital transformation of schools or equity, educational equity. And as for us, we try to conduct international research and provide policymakers with information about place of our students among international students. And I don't mean such famous studies as PISA or TEAMS, because there are another company who works with them. I mean studies that we conduct with our international partners, like SUPA test project that you mentioned. It was very important information about our STEM students that was funded in this study. So we try to provide them with information. And also, for example, it's very important, we work a lot with primary school.
I see.
And we try to measure the individual progress of each student from the start of first grade till the end of primary school. It's fourth grade in Russia. And we can show the individual individual progress of each student. Each student. It's similar to pupil monitoring system that was developed by CITO in the Netherlands. And so we can, and we publish results of our research and results of individual progress and relations between different factors and the results. So it's information that, of course, it's very important in this for policymakers.
So we're kind of coming to the end of the interview, and just for one final question, what are you excited about next? Do you have a next project that you're either working on or maybe finishing up, or something that isn't quite out yet, but you're excited about?
It's very difficult to mention only one.
You can do a couple.
But one, because we are working now on development the instrument for measuring city literacy. So it's a new construct, and Moscow government asked us for this toolkit. It's a complex construct, city literacy, for students who are 10th grade school students. So they are about 16.
Right.
And it will be scenario-based instrument, computer-based, scenario-based, based on evidence-centered methodology, and really it will include several components like local literacy or digital literacy or international communication and so on. And so it's a very exciting project, and we are going to pilot it in October, and maybe it will be international new study.
So we'll have to take it and translate it into English, I think.
Yes, it's very interesting, very. And we use modern technology, maps, active maps in the software. So it's very interesting.
Oh, that's fascinating. So it's sort of like how people sense and understand the city or like urban spaces. Is that?
It's urban spaces, how to, for example, how to organize road from one point to another point by the short way, how to help other people, ecological problems of big city, and many other problems that are included in this construct.
I see. Wow, that's fascinating.
So it's scenario based. So it's students has a problem that the problem is included in their real life situations. And so he goes through software and tries to solve different tasks to solve the problem.
Well, we'll be looking out for that. Dr. Kardanova, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Yes.
And we hope to hear from you again.
Thank you for inviting me. It was very pleasure.
And this concludes our KIX EAP podcast, which is released every first Wednesday of the month. Of course, the opinions expressed on the KIX EAP podcast are solely those of the host and the guest. The KIX EAP podcast is made possible by KIX, which stands for Knowledge and Innovation Exchange. KIX is an initiative of the Global Partnership for Education. Globally, KIX is administered by the International Development Research Center in Canada. NORAG in Geneva hosts one of the 4 regional hubs of KIX. Thanks for listening. Find us on the NORAG or GPE KIX websites. You can subscribe to the KIX EAP podcast, newsletter, and webinar series, and also learn about KIX global or regional projects. Additionally, you can subscribe directly on Spotify or SoundCloud to receive notifications of the new monthly podcast episodes.